Hey, baby, you care for a piece of cheese? You want some vino? We have some cheese and vino, eh? It's the Drunken Tyromancy show here. Hey, everyone. I just finished doing another video on Battle of the Sexes. Oh, shit, hang on, sorry. I went to the wrong screen there. There you go. I'll come and sit down with you. So I'm trying to do as much content as I can in a short space of time kind of thing to build up, a body of work so that hopefully if somebody finds my little channel, there's at least enough content there that hopefully they can find something they like and, sort of once you've got a bit of a base there, hopefully things progress a bit faster. Because I haven't got any budget for marketing this, it's like all just me on my own doing stuff and putting it out there. Anyway, hang on, I'll just switch over quickly. Hold on. Yeah. Now, I got all the suggestions from people and just finished doing one Battle of the Sexes, which is currently rendering. And I thought while that's doing its job over there, I would do another one. So I'm starting to get a bit of a flow here. I think I kind of, have at least a rudimentary idea of what I'm doing and of the topics that people mentioned to me. I thought I'd do one on the whole, kind of climate change and the very misrepresented link between resource usage, overpopulation, this climate change thing. There's a lot of stuff that again, and once again here we have to talk about brinkmanship. It's like there are very real issues. There are real but misrepresented issues. There are fake things being inserted into a story that is otherwise true. And then there are completely invented things. Because the people in power, they don't care, as I've said before, they don't care whether the story is the threat that they want to use to make you feel afraid. They don't care if it's real or imagined. They only care with respect to if it is fully imagined, if there is no real component, then it is harder for them to create the case because they have to invent everything. If something is real, at least in part, then a lot of the work is done for them. They can just take that thing, right? Because the very fact that there was a thing there, they can manipulate people who might be otherwise quite well-meaning and just put an idea in their head, just get them to insert something which is actually completely flawed, but subtly enough flawed that even sometimes an expert won't see the flaw. Like somebody whispered in their ear and got them to do something which was kind of corrupting their whole movement. And in the background, if these people with all the money and power are coming in with branding and news items and so forth, it's very easy for them to just fully take control of the whole narrative. So there's other people out there which they don't even have to pay you specifically for setting up this whole thing for them because there's a real issue that you're concerned about and you're trying to raise awareness about it. And these people just let you do that off your own bat, and then they just come in and take it for their own agenda. So in this whole thing of, if we just kind of grouped it all together and just called it sort of ecological stuff that's going on, the person who suggested the topic, what they suggested was windmills out in the ocean, and hence the title of this one, which I decided to call tilting at offshore windmills. So we can tilt against those windmills, but let's go a bit deeper and see what's really going on. Because it's more than just this issue of, sort of the whole thing being faked. It's like a little bit of this and a little bit of that as usual. So if you want to understand ecologically what is going on the planet, there are natural forces at work and there are man-made forces at work. And don't concern yourself with this whole debate about but is the man-made forces significant enough to overwhelm? Because it's you're just asking a single question about the entire thing. It might be true in one area, not in another. So you have to break it down further to make your question meaningful. Now, if we want to know, are some of these areas more predominantly man-made issues than naturally caused issues? Well, then you can easily identify ones where there are. Like, so take, for example, lithium mining and things like that, where they have these gigantic big ponds full of highly toxic stuff, right? And it's just sitting there out in the open, right? Now, the groundwater, even if they put in, plastic sheeting and everything under that kind of pond, even if they do that, there's still going to be some escape of materials. Why? Wind will pick it up. Some thing being blown along in the wind will jump into the pond and splash some out. There might be like a big, huge rain event, unexpected for that area, but happens once every 10, 50, 100 years, whatever sort of thing. And all of a sudden the thing overflows and tons of it leaks out and everything dies. So do these things happen that are man-made? Absolutely. There's no denying it. The problem is that the people who use it for brinkmanship don't care. Like, they're making billions and trillions out of these industries. They don't give a shit. It's like it's not happening in their backyard. That's all they care about. They were never going to go there on a holiday. They don't understand the link between ecological systems, that what you do in one part of the planet eventually affects another part of the planet. No matter how far away, it will eventually, if it's significant enough, although the effect is diluted, it'll still eventually get to many other areas. And in the case of these gigantic toxic ponds, they could create massive, in some cases, I would imagine, possibly global scale problems. It is astounding that some of these things go on. Now, I'm sure that there are, engineers and safety people working on it, because even though the people at the top don't care, they're forced to care by the fact that they don't want to die either. But because they are so selfish, they will tend to use the method that is just cheap enough to solve the worst possible problems, but there's other perfectly catastrophic problems on a very grand scale that they're fine with, so long as it's not going to affect them or anybody that they care about. Because for them, it's all just this whole bottom line mentality thinking. Like, it's really that whole issue of, what do they say? Is it Latin, the reductio absurdum? The idea of reducing everything to the simplest possible explanation, but to such an exaggerated degree that your answers become absurd. And that is the mentality they have, because for them, it's all just this bottom line about profit and loss. How much did I spend versus how much did I make? And it doesn't matter how catastrophic the consequences of what they don't take responsibility for, they're fine. They just made 20 million, 2 billion, whatever the hell they made. So understand ecological problems in that context. Whether it be windmills offshore, whether it be solar panels, whether it be people talking about climate change, right? Understand that the dumbed down catchphrase is for the purpose of the fear campaign and brinkmanship, right? That's what they're doing. It's just their playbook that they always go to. Once they can make you afraid, then they can make money, gain power, reduce your rights, all the stuff that they do. But that fact does not mean that there was never a problem. It just means that they are not accurately portraying the problem, right? Or they might be kind of skipping over the details that you really want to know and pretending it's something else under the banner of their catchphrase. So it's actually talk about overpopulation, because this again is like a complete myth. And it's easy to go find the data. It's easy to do the basic arithmetic involved in this. It's literally primary school level arithmetic, just with large numbers, to disprove their entire case. As I was saying, overpopulation is a myth, right? And the calculation that I mentioned earlier that you can do for yourself is if you take the land surface area of the planet, okay, which is approximately, say, either 150 million square kilometers of land, or we're talking like above sea level, or 15 billion hectares, or in imperial units, you'd look at like just short of about 60 million square miles, right? So however you think, that's roughly it, you know. And if you were to look at other statistics, what you can do starting from this total is you say, okay, let's remove from the total all of the areas which are hostile to life in such a way where it's not like there's no life there. There's plenty of life there, but it's just that, like, let's just remove them and call them wilderness, right? Given that only a small proportion of the world's population chooses to live in such regions, and given that we're not concerned with our calculation as to where people actually end up, we're just trying to take the total amount of land and look at this as a resource usage issue, because this is the basis upon which you would argue a case one way or the other for overpopulation. So you begin with that starting point, right? So let's just say it's like 150 million square kilometers. And what you do is you say, rightio, well, let's say we remove the entirety of Alaska, Antarctica, Iceland, Greenland, and Siberia, right? So we're taking like all these kind of cold, tundric sort of regions where, yeah, like people live there, but let's just for argument's sake say that all of that was untouched wilderness, right? Nobody lives there. And whatever natural resources are there, whatever species are there, we're just not touching them, right? It's just utterly untouched wilderness. Now, on top of that, let's look at all the land remaining and remove anything else which is mountainous, right? And so we remove all of the mountainous. Now, in reality, I think it's about 10% of the world's population actually lives in mountainous regions. But for argument's sake, again, we're just going to say that, okay, let's grab all of the mountainous regions and we'll just call all of that like untouched wilderness as well. Of all the land remaining, let's take half and we'll say, right, that's also untouched wilderness, right? We haven't even built anything there. It's not for any purpose for humans. It's just basically untouched wilderness, right? Of all the land remaining after that, let's take half and we'll say, right, this is for public parks, gardens, infrastructure, like fully kind of public stuff, right? So there's that. Of all the land remaining after that, let's take half and call it kind of, other infrastructure, whether it be private infrastructure, whatever, right? Of all the land remaining, if you now divide that amongst every man, woman, child, and baby, all of them treated as fully grown adults in the prime of their consumptive life, and all as fully independent individuals, you have enough land to give each individual an entire property on which they will have enough land to build a home and farm all of the food that they will need for their entire life, right? And I'm not talking like a measly little hut. I'm saying they can have a home unto themselves, an entire goddamn house, right? And the land around it, right? Now think about this. We didn't touch the forests in the wilderness that we set aside. We didn't touch any of the waterways like rivers, lakes, the oceans, right? Still haven't touched them. We didn't go underground to build our houses, sort of thing, to preserve above ground real estate. We didn't build tree houses. We didn't build earthships. We're just talking about regular houses which use above ground real estate. And yet there was still that much land that a 10 billion population of exclusively prime consumptive life adults all have their own house, their own land. And all of the rest of that wilderness or public infrastructure, an enormous amount of space, way more than we actually dedicate to it. Because really, if you want to look at overpopulation, you have to argue it in terms of there is no solution which solves the problem without reducing the population, because that's the only way that you could actually define overpopulation, right? If there is no solution, none, whereby you can fix the problem without reducing the population, then and only then do you have overpopulation. In all other possible solutions, what you have is resource wastage, resource destruction, resource usage inefficiency, right? Doesn't mean that the people were responsible for their share of all resource usage. If that were true, that everybody was responsible for their share of all resource usage, then first of all, we would all get a fair share of all resource usage, which we clearly don't. It would also mean, of course, if the statement were true, then it would mean that we are all responsible for our fair share of the cost of warfare. What? I don't even want you going to war, right? I don't want you doing all of these like assassinations and coups and proxy wars and your puppet bogeymen terrorists who you insert into some place to say, oh, see, terrorists, and then you come in and bomb everybody and steal all their stuff. I don't want any of that. So there is a zero share of that for me, right? I'm not benefiting from it. I'm not asking for it. I'm completely against it. And even though you might use some of the money that I paid into taxation for public services for me, or for public services of groups of people and populations of people where I might benefit from it, warfare is an area where, God damn it, no. Right? The only thing that I would feel happy to contribute towards is a purely domestic defense force that is reasonably sized, and that is moderated by extremely good diplomatic efforts to prevent any need for using it. Full stop. That's my contribution. I do not want to contribute a cent over that, right? But what have we got? We've got the Australian government taking hundreds of billions of dollars, effectively giving it to foreign governments and foreign corporations to purchase weapons from them, which is bailing out their economy from all the disastrously stupid mistakes they've made and all of the waste in their thing and their idiotic culture of just like being, worshipping narcissism. Some people, and I know these counter arguments because I hear them so often whenever I raise this thing, like they're going to say things like, oh yeah, but not all land is arable land, and they'll go into some statistics for that. Well, I had a look at the same statistics and it does actually completely back what I'm saying, besides which there are really like low-tech solutions to making land fertile again. And if you want to look at it from a longer-term historical perspective, there are many areas of land which people are going to call infertile and, oh, it's no good for agriculture, when in reality it actually is already being used for agriculture. And as the Saudis and as the Chinese and many other people have shown, you can very quickly turn it back into agricultural land. You just basically bring water and a few other nutrients there, you set up some things, and it might take like, a few years or decades for it to kind of get going. But the moment you create that, what happens? Well, lizards and birds and insects and other things start turning up, and they're adding further like sort of sharing of resources from other areas where they sort of migrate from. Their whole life cycle begins. They bring with them bacterium and fungi and loads of different other like, microorganisms. The place starts to become an ecosystem, and all you had to do was put in like a bit of an impetus and then just keep supplying water until it establishes, at which point that forest will generate its own rainfall and reduce evaporation from the soil and all sorts of other things, right? And besides which, even if you had to continue supplying water forever, again, there are, really like low-tech solutions for doing that. So the longer it stays there, the more entrenched that ecosystem becomes, the more integrated it becomes, the more balanced it becomes, the more robust it becomes against the kinds of, natural events that can occur that place stress on an ecosystem. And the larger the area you convert that way, the even more robust and strong it becomes, because it's like every, unit of forest surrounded by other units of forest. They're all kind of supporting themselves and each other. So when you look at this like division of land as an example of how to disprove this concept of overpopulation, what you see is this is really not hard to disprove, because that's just one area and one thing which shows you from a land perspective, there is no reason at all for anybody to live in poverty. Now, you may also argue this whole thing about like, what is it? Like, is it a low-tech living? Like, what about manufacturing stuff? Well, first of all, we already set aside land for other infrastructure like manufacturing. And as I mentioned before, with the houses, with the domestic living, we didn't even bother going underground. Well, what if we do go underground? What if we do have industries where, why are we not putting the effort into manufacturing in facilities underground where the environment can be filtered and contained, and things like in the atmosphere itself can be filtered out, and you can reclaim materials and process them and so forth, where you can control that environment from a resource usage point of view? Because, I mean, you know, how insulated is that? If you have a factory like underground, then all the ground around that box is all effectively thermally insulated, right? So you have to spend less money on heating and cooling because that building is not exposed to this massive thermonuclear reaction in the sky shining down on it for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours without any kind of tree coverage. You know, you're now underground, right? Where there's a constant temperature around you and you can get the temperature just right, and that little microclimate thing will stay where you want it to be on the smallest input of additional energy. And you can do the same thing with your water usage, with, you know, loads of different things. And just because it's underground doesn't mean that your workers can't, you know, go above ground and get some sunshine. I'm just saying that, like, you know, if you're in a factory and you're working in a factory, and I've worked in factories, like, I know what it's like. I mean, it's not necessarily nice, but in this kind of controlled environment, it can actually be made really healthy. You have full spectrum lighting. You have negative ion generators. You have lighting which simulates real sunlight in every respect, including the changing of light during the day as it comes through different angles of atmosphere, different seasons. You know, you can do all of that stuff if you really want to, right? And the only argument they have against it is this economic argument by people who just want to keep their costs down and get really, really, really rich. Well, if you've got a guy who's worth 30 billion at the top, I'm going to suggest to you that you can afford this, right? Like, why does he need 30 billion? What has he done that's so bloody amazing? It's like, oh, well, he's a job creator. It's no. The idea was the job creator, and the idea actually came from that guy. He just paid for it, right? Why? Because we have an economic paradigm in which some people are in control of vast amounts of resources, right? But the job creator is the people working in the factory, the people doing the jobs. They are the ones who create the new jobs, not the guy who owns it. He's the job limiter, right? Because he's the one who will or won't fund something, right? Now, can the idea be done? Does it matter whose money goes into it? No. Does it matter if money goes into it all? Well, not necessarily. I mean, if you had a different economic paradigm in which you could just deliver the resources directly and you didn't need this intermediary thing called money, well, then arguably the money's irrelevant. And that's the topic again for another video another time. You know, wiping out the Earth's population so that only 500 million people remain, that's got nothing to do with saving the planet. That's just got to do with one group of people keeping enough people to be slaves and themselves being like living in absolute luxury with the entire world as their playground. That is all it is about, right? They just hate the idea that so many of us are so set against their lust for power and global domination and the rest of the insanity that they seem to think are perfectly legitimate hobbies, like molesting children on an island and pretending they never went there, while attacking somebody who exposes their war crimes and keeping him in jail. Forget about whether all of it is predominantly man-made. Forget about whether all of it is predominantly naturally occurring. That doesn't matter to resolve the debate. The debate should be about, can we do things more efficiently with less waste? Can we do things more efficiently with less suffering? Can we do things more efficiently with less destruction, less pollution, blah, blah, blah? The answer is yes, it's simple. There are technological solutions for some things and there are ideological solutions for other things, where what are our motivations for doing it? So what's our motivation for warfare? Well, because we have an idiotic economic paradigm. This idiotic economic paradigm basically says to you, like, this is literally how I take the profit motive, right? It basically says, go maximally exploit all resources you can get your hands on per unit of resource and time, while taking the least possible responsibility, preferably none at all, for any and all deleterious consequences of your actions. Right? That's an externality. That's somebody else's problem. You just want the profit, right? And then lie about it, as like, to sort of just bring it home. There is a certain element of the population who, thinking that way and very selfishly, don't care what they destroy, don't care what they take no responsibility for. So we have an economic paradigm that is pushing you to maximally exploit resources per unit of resource and time while taking the least possible responsibility for the consequences. That is how you maximize your profit, right? This is not a well-constructed economic paradigm. It's people are just rushing to make a stack of money, right? That is their primary concern, is making the money. It's not about solving the problem. It's not even about recognizing what the problem really is, right? They don't care. And hence, the worst of them come along, grab a real problem, exaggerate it out of all proportion, misrepresent it, add additional things in there, lie about some component, and just tailor their whole agenda towards, what's the product we're selling, guys? Oh, we've got like big windmills. We can put them in the ocean. Fantastic. Okay, hey, everyone, this is what you should be afraid of. Buy our ocean windmills. Ha! They are just on this agenda to sell their big windmills. Now, do the engineers in the design and engineering firms that have come up with these big windmills, do they necessarily have nefarious intentions? No, like they might be very well-meaning people, Do they necessarily understand the issue? Some of them might, some of them not. But typically what I find is that not many people go into like the level of detail of thinking that I'm describing to you. And I've only just, like, if I was to actually plan this, I've done this literally just ad-libbing in a few different takes, and I'll stitch them together to make the end video. But I'm just literally just ad-libbing each thing. The only reason I'm stopping to re-record is just, if I make a mistake or forget where I was going or whatever. So the point being is, this is just the shit off the top of my head. If I really sat down and wrote this first and planned it and had like full kind of production values, I could present you with an entire series of things going into loads and loads of detail of tons and tons of areas of all things related to the kind of the overall topic, and show all of the integrations and intertwining, dependencies and interdependencies and influences, you name it, right? And if I then did a whole stack of additional research, I'm sure I could make it even longer. But the point is that what matters is just this: never fall for a false dichotomy, never fall for a dumbed down catchphrase, never fall for the idea that just because there was a falsehood told, that therefore there was no truth at all, right? Because that's the false dichotomy thing again, is like where they're basically saying either this is true or it's false. Well, who says? Who said it has to be either true or false? That may be true in some circumstances, but it's not going to be true in all circumstances, and certainly not when you're dealing with a vast, complex issue with many, many, many different stories being told and many aspects to it. You're never going to get it just being just true or false, right? You could take individual statements out of one side or another and say, okay, this statement is true or false, but you can't easily take one side or the other and just say, this is all bullshit, that's all not. And unfortunately, that's what I see people doing the most. And often when I ask people, or when they tell me otherwise, whether I ask them or not, like, what is their motivation? What's their reasoning for thinking that it's all true or all false? You end up coming down to discovering that they do not truly understand at all why they've taken their own position. They think they understand, and they'll often be able to tell you a reason, but their reason makes no sense. It is not a basis upon which to draw any kind of definitive conclusion. Even if they could have come to roughly the correct conclusion, but the path they used to get there is not the reason why it's true, right? And this is particularly true in a group of people that, it's like they're very well-meaning. Their heart is in the right place, but they're just dumb as two bricks, right? And they comment on things that they do not understand, and they're absolutely certain they're right because some kind of spiritual guru or some kind of thing told them so. And they won't admit that that's the reason in those words, but ultimately when you ask them their reason, that's exactly what they're saying. So if you have no background in science, right? And I'm not talking about memorizing facts. That's not science. I'm not talking about knowing who to trust, okay? Consensus, trust, authority, expertise, experience, these things have got nothing to do with the facts. Is there or is there not a proof? Not just like a reasonable argument, I mean a really rock solid proof to show that what has been claimed is true and here's why and here's all the evidence, right? And if you don't understand enough about science and reasoning to understand that proof, then the best you can ever do is consider and contemplate what people are telling you. Do more research, try to understand it, right? And to come to the best conclusion you can, knowing that and fully admitting that you might be completely off the mark. But what matters in this case is that we all share this planet. It does have a finite amount of resources. If you want to think, like they're replenished over time, but that ability to replenish depends upon how well we treat the planet. The availability of any resource. So there might be, for example, a resource which in one place has enough of it and enough replenishment that it would easily provide everybody on the planet everything they needed. Even if this was the only source, it's enough and it will always be enough. But you might be living in a location where there's some kind of logistical bottleneck of getting it to you. Therefore, from your perspective, in your reference frame, it is in limited supply. It is scarce. Somebody else doesn't experience that scarcity, right? And scarcity is a thing which is manufactured by economic and political and other concerns, but also manufactured by waste and inefficiency and destruction. So we have to take everything in this greater context, and this issue is no different to any other issue. So I don't particularly care about any one aspect of the debate or another, excepting in talking about the specifics of it. So I'm not going to tilt at offshore windmills, but nonetheless, that's the detail we need to discuss, and we need to discuss distributed generation. We need to discuss why are we putting resources into warfare. We need to discuss why is there so much land and we hold on to it and just sell it in small parcels, and we just develop it in small parcels while there are people who are homeless. That's because people who own a house can get rent off other people. And if we made more houses, just gave them, you wouldn't be able to extract rent from them. But society's losing the creative and technical output of that human being, which you have no way of knowing what it would be. You are putting up an unknown loss. And the larger the set of people that you apply that unknown loss to, the greater the probability that there are gigantic benefits in there. All for what? For supporting parasitism in society? How the fuck did you bank on that as being the best possible solution? I know that doesn't directly have anything to do with energy generation or windmills, but for me, all of these issues, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. All of these issues are an integration of many, many, many issues that may or may not necessarily come from the same general area of issue, but they're related in some way. And by taking that integrated approach to the conversation and to the solutions, what we get is a vastly better improvement in society, right? And that's what I've actually spent a lot of my life working on. I've got ideas and stuff that date back decades that are all about looking at how do we truly make vastly greater systems, vastly more efficient, vastly more powerful in terms of delivering real stuff to people, Anyways, look, I think I've kind of blabbered on enough. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to paste this one together because this bit has to go in between two other cut bits. So I'll go figure that out. I'll deliver it to you. I'll probably tack this little bit on the end. And good night. Thank you very much.